Good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of NLinBusiness, the World Trade Center Netherlands Association and the Amsterdam WTC Business Club, very warm welcome to you from this Capital C studio. My name is Sophie Derksen, I'm a journalist, and in the midst of this nail-biter of a presidential election, we will reflect upon the potential consequences of these elections for geopolitics and international trade. With me here in Amsterdam is Willem Post. Willem, you are an expert on American politics and foreign policy. You are an historian by training. What do you think? How will these elections be remembered?
History is in the making now.
We do experience history in the making.
Yeah, you know, in 2000 we had this whole fight about the votes in Florida between Gore and Bush. I will not say that this is nothing compared with what we see now, but yeah, that was only in Florida, and that was very concrete about paper ballots, the hanging chats. Are they pushed through or in the middle? And okay, you can have judges looking to this. Are the rules okay, etc. But now, well, the judicial fight, it's already started in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Georgia. I can guarantee you that the planes are already almost cleared to fly.
Fly in with lawyers.
Yeah, definitely, thousands of them. And I feel that I'm now in the midst of a political Hitchcock movie.
And how could that movie end?
Yeah, well, first and for all, in a democracy, each vote counts. So the political track is, of course, the dominant track at this very moment. And counting is still underway. And it's very, very close. Today, we see that, for instance, in a state like Georgia, won, as the media have declared, some of the national networks in the US, won by President Trump. Biden is now coming very close behind Mr. Trump. And, well, if you talk about Georgia, the big city of Atlanta and the suburbs, a lot of those votes still have to be counted. And there will be a press conference later this day. So that could even give Georgia to Mr. Biden. But Mr. Biden won. Fox News, CNN declared Mr. Biden won Arizona with the big city Phoenix and a lot of countryside and the desert and the beautiful parks there, the national parks. But yeah, if you talk about Arizona, we will see if the lead of Mr. Biden stands. And the latest results coming in from Arizona show that Mr. Trump is coming a little bit closer to Mr. Biden. So each vote counts. And in the midst of this political track, we had the president yesterday already saying, stop the vote. I will go to the Supreme Court. I think Mr. Trump made a mistake. You cannot go to the Supreme Court in Washington. First, you have to start it in the state itself.
Of course, yes.
And I think that Mrs. Verloop from the US Embassy is right. This could take weeks and weeks. Well, we have an end date, December 14. Then we need the exact electoral votes. But you can also have a contested situation that the Republicans have their own electors and the Democrats. We will see. But uncertainty is the key word for the moment.
Yes, and uncertainty was the key word, Bert Colijn, in one of the scenarios that you had sketched out with your team at ING beforehand. The scenario of a contested result was obviously the shortest, I guess, because mainly to summarize, as uncertainty is bad news for the markets. How are you, as a strategic economist, doing in these uncertain times? And what scenario have you seen evolving?
Well, first of all, how am I doing? Thanks for asking. I've gone completely down the rabbit hole of this entire thing, sort of county by county looking at it. Not that that's necessary for my job per se, but just because it's very... I did manage to get a bit of sleep in, but that's actually, I sleep quite well. I have a 2-year-old son, so I'm trained with these situations. But no, I mean, this is the scenario that, in financial markets at least, is the most worried about by far. A contested election is what everyone is very worried about. So that means that I get a lot of phone calls at a time like this.
From who?
From whom? From clients, from people in the organization itself that are dying to know what that would mean. Now, it means, of course, as we've already heard, that we just have to wait somewhat longer before we know how it's shaping up. But we can, of course, also already draw some very preliminary conclusions about what sort of scenarios we can set to the side, which is already very helpful in getting an idea about what sort of environment we're going to end up in.
But maybe just starting with the scenario now, the economical scenario that you see evolving now, can you just briefly sketch it? How have the markets reacted?
So I think the big response from markets has actually been so far to we can set a blue wave to the side. That's actually not completely certain yet, but in financial markets, people move quicker than we usually
Thank
do,
God.
right?
Okay.
So that's they've already said, it's very difficult for that to happen now. So that means that one thing that's very important for the American economy right now is that we see a quick stimulus package evolve. Here in the Netherlands, we already have stimulus packages set out for a period quite long from here already that actually overgoes our elections. In the US, they didn't manage to get a second stimulus package that the economy quite direly needs ahead of the elections, and we are therefore sort of waiting for something like that to emerge early January. That would have been possible in case of a blue wave, or at least more likely to happen. Now, with the Senate likely with the Republicans, it's likely that we're going to remain in sort of a political deadlock. That makes it, for some people, quite, it gives a bit of a buffer to a bit of an extreme economic situation. Some people in financial markets like that, some people, economists like that. But what economists are concerned about is the fact that it's unlikely that they'll deliver a stimulus package quickly. So I think that that's one of the things that you see an initial market response to now, is that in financial markets, you see that people are getting concerned about not having a quick recovery path for 2021.
All right, and how that package should look like, I guess we'll zoom into that a bit later on in this conversation. Let's see if we manage to make a clear connection with Washington, where we have Casper Thomas for this occasion. Do we have a connection with Washington?
I can hear you very well. There we are. Good morning.
Good morning, Casper. How have you woken up today?
Very well, actually, because at some point during last night, I thought, I don't think anything is going to be cold anymore. So last night was better than the one before. And now I wake up with the view of Amsterdam, which is behind you. So that is a very nostalgic way of waking up this morning.
And can you give us let's say, a current actual view from your Washington window in terms of what is the most important thing the Washington people and all of the US are waiting for today? What to look for?
Well, the first thing we're looking for, Mr. Post already talked about this, is Georgia going to be called in the course of today? My latest tally, it has gone down to 20,000 votes still being counted, so which is a very small number. But the odds at the same time are between the two candidates are roughly that number. And everybody's frantically putting together the electoral maps, trying to see. It is a sort of two small parts to victory for either candidate scenario that we're now looking at, and the possibility, which would be extraordinary, of a tie. That is even possible. Both candidates having an equal number of votes in the electoral college. In which case, I think the rules is that House of Representatives would have to break the tie, which is currently run by the Democrats. So that is a scenario. But at the same time, I try to hold off the thinking of what is going to happen until we really get some more final results. So it is at the moment, indeed, as everybody just said, very, very uncertain.
Let's see then if we can zoom in on the potential geopolitical consequences of these historical elections, as Mr. Post has just confirmed. Although it looks like Mr. Biden could be on his way to the White House, we will also look at the scenario with 4 more years of President Trump. Willem, you have studied Mr. Biden's plans for your article for the Klingendaal Spectator extensively. It seemed as if you took the right bet. What is the main difference that you see between the two candidates when it comes to their foreign policy plans that could be relevant for our audience?
Well, I would say Mr. Biden is a strong defender of alliances and comes up for multilateralism. is also a friend of Europe. If you look at the past, I assume that Mr. Biden, as a president, will have his first trip abroad to Berlin to strengthen the ties with Europe. So that will give us a comforting feeling here in Europe. So, and Mr. Biden, that's maybe another assurance for us, is a typical middle path politician. He is really, he has always been in the center of US politics. In the campaign, you have to be a bit more radical and playing a little bit the cards also of Bernie Sanders, the left wing of the Democratic Party. But in essence, this is a centrist.
But this is the assuring part. But you've called Mr. Biden also a form of, let's say, America First light.
Yes,
so
because,
what to expect?
Yeah, definitely. Because in the last 4 years, Mr. Biden and Mr. Obama left the White House 4 years ago. And Mr. Biden himself said the world has changed. And we have now multiple crises in the United States. And so we need a different policy. And we have to focus more on the interior, on the United States itself. So that means, for instance, from an economic perspective, that there will be initiated a Buy American Products campaign. Actually, he will close the loopholes in the Buy American Products law from the 30s, from Franklin Roosevelt's crisis years, to guarantee that US companies get more contracts from the US government when there will be a huge investment in infrastructure, not only in a traditional sense, the bridges and the roads, but also in artificial intelligence and, let's say, the whole technical part of the economy. So Europeans must not be disappointed when you could be disappointed, of course, but Mr. Biden will more focus on the US, especially in the first year. He wants to call himself some sort of a Franklin Delano Roosevelt for this century. So US focus. On the other hand, I expect Mr. Biden to lift some tariff barriers, maybe not in the first months. Concerning Europe, we all know what happened between the US and Europe, especially also if you see wine products, but also Boeing and Airbus. Biden will be a bit more moderate, and that is, I think, also important for Europe. And talking about this whole idea of America First, you definitely need, for very special products and innovation, also European companies. And the key is, I think, if Europe and the United States will work better together, that we, together with the United States, that's what they expect from us, that's what they urge from Europe, to work together to put pressure on the Chinese, definitely also from an economic perspective.
But however, whoever will win, foreign policy experts agree, and you do as well, both Trump and Biden will have to connect their goals abroad to domestic needs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Such as jobs and education. Casper, if public opinion, if you will drive the next president's foreign policies, where will that lead us potentially? What do you think?
Well, I think in the idea of some sort of America First is indeed quite widely shared among both sides of the political spectrum here. If we think back very shortly to the Democratic primary, you had Elizabeth Warren, a presidential candidate, who drew up a plan for economic patriotism, as they called it. The US government buying US products, making sure that the money they spend ends up with US businesses. And this is really a playbook that Joe Biden has been listening to and will incorporate in his agenda as well. So it differs a bit what kind of name you put on it, whether you call it economic patriotism or America First.
Light.
Well, they are basically two ways of saying the same thing. That in a way, a few decades or many decades even of globalization have not necessarily been beneficial for American workers and for American families. So I do expect, which is still an if, and let's emphasize that if Mr. Biden becomes a president, that some sort of version of that thinking will be a basis for the economic policy of the US government.
And has Mr. Biden, announced already, made any election promises with respect to the economy and trade that may directly affect European entrepreneurs, as you know of?
Well, that is a bit of a difficult question. The issue is that the campaign so far has been very thin on content. If you hear it's been really a sort of a show of characters between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the brash Mr. Trump, the sort of soothing, more comforting type that Mr. Biden likes to play. So you really had to search for big differences in expressed policy between the two candidates. It's really been a bit of a on-the-cuff kind of a campaign in that sense. The Republican Party has drawn up no plans for the coming 4 years, except we are going to support Mr. Trump. So there is no clear policy agenda there. If you then switch to the Democrats, there is a policy agenda, which, for instance, as one of his main features, has big investments in green technology and renewables. However, if we look to a scenario where we have a deadlock scenario with a Democratic presidency and a Republican Senate, I think many of the things that would need any form of congressional support are simply not going to happen. And Mr. Biden's ability to maneuver will be limited to what he can do with the executive office of the presidency, which is indeed maybe run trade tariffs, for instance. But the leeway that Mr. Biden is looking at if he were to be in the White House is just simply very, very small. So at some point he said during his campaign, if you vote for me, nothing will fundamentally change. And I think that he meant that as a reassuring, but I think that those words are coming back to haunt him.
Yeah.
Bert Colijn, short reaction from your side to what you've just heard, saying also about China. I mean, important place to look at, of course, the other side of the ocean. How are the expectations in that direction? And what should, in your opinion, be the top priorities of the coming US government for the next years?
I think that question can be answered in one. The top priority is indeed how to build up an economy that has been ravished by one of the worst recessions that we've ever seen. And I think that's the answer in that is that it's not just going to be America first. We're all going to be looking at ourselves first. We're going to be building back Europe first. We're going to be focusing on how to build the Dutch economy back first, because those domestic lockdowns have had such an enormous impact on the economy that it's very important for every country to focus on how you can make sure that the lasting damage that those lockdowns have had is going to be as small as possible. So whoever is going to be president, more likely Biden at this point, is going to have to come up with a stimulus bill quickly that focuses on how to build back an economy quickly. From a trade perspective and a China perspective, that indeed means that the pressure is perhaps not necessarily going to be on the trade relationship as much from a focus point as we saw in 2018 and 2019 under Trump. But it's unlikely that there will be a big effort to build that back. I also think it's unlikely that we're immediately going to see a reversal of tariffs. When we look at what that means for business and what that means for European business, then you get a sense listening to this that there would be little difference between Biden and Trump. But there is a very important difference that could likely emerge out of this, which is that it looks like Biden is not necessarily looking to pick the fight as much as what we've seen under Trump for those years prior to Corona. What that means is that European businesses could get a bit of a relief from the threat of tariffs. And what we see in the economy is that the threat of tariffs is almost worse than actually introducing tariffs itself, because it's very difficult to judge whether you can get an order from a country that might impose tariffs on you, because it means that you might be producing for a loss when those tariffs are introduced in the meantime. And talking to businesses over the past years, you see that that's been one of the bigger issues that have actually caused delayed investment, and that means that when we are relieved of that type of rhetoric, that would already help quite a bit in trade relationships.
May I add one sentence? I talked with some advisors from Joe Biden, from his inner circle, and although it's not on the priority list to restart the trade talks with Europe, they want to lift the steel and aluminium tariffs rather soon, and maybe already in the first year, as a first good step and a signal that the US is back again.
And is this confirmed policy, or is this just you and the rumors around Joe Biden?
There are some very, very influential advisors. I mentioned them in my article, Tony Blinken, for instance. And if they say it, they have the ear of probably, we will see, the new US president. So it counts what they say.
Well, I mean,
we will see.
So that's it, right? I mean, America first, definitely. But around the edges, there are definitely going to be shifts in style around how America will be first. And that could be quite favorable for European and Dutch business.
As we are, well, touching upon the economy in a broader sense, maybe zoom in a bit on the domestic situation in the US. You've mentioned this package being very important already a number of times. What is the most crucial? What should happen in terms of this package and in terms of taxation, maybe? What do you expect?
Well, so first, what's the most crucial? I think the most crucial at this point is continued income support for Americans that have become unemployed. That's what we've seen. We've had a very generous package in the United States until about August, when the first package expired. After that, there was no agreement in Congress on a lengthening of that. We see a very reduced form of unemployment benefits because of that, and that means that for the American economy, there's a big risk that consumption is going to suffer from the loss of income that many Americans have had so far. That's a big part, and I think a very important part of a first stimulus package. Then looking sort of broader at the stimulus plans that Biden has been talking about on his campaign, there you see that that's much more focused on how to build America in the longer run. And that's something that us economists get excited about. We like to hear how you're going to increase the potential output of an economy, especially in a time that we are all in of demographic decline. The aging population means that there are less hands at work. We see productivity growth decrease. So if you have fewer hands and the growth of productivity is weak, then you have a problem. And quite a few of the factors that are mentioned on the Biden campaign are often mentioned by economists as well as things that would be helpful to lift the longer-term potential of an economy. So investment in the digital infrastructure is in the U.S. seems to be much needed. You see that investment in education is very welcome. PISA scores have been dropping in the U.S., and that's definitely a source of concern. And of course, anything related to a new green economy is, for the longer run, of course, very, very important to happen. So it ticks quite a few boxes. But then the question that Casper rightly posed already: how much of that can happen when you have a divided Congress? That means that it's very likely that quite a few of the more ambitious plans could be scratched or small or become a lot smaller.
But what do you expect in terms of, let's say, taxation policy under be it Trump or be it Biden?
You asked about taxation. Well, of course, so in terms of taxation, the plans are quite clear, right? I mean, under Trump, what we can expect is he's had a huge reform of tax already, the biggest since the 80s. And it's unlikely that you could see a lot more happen there. I mean, there's talk of a small further decline of corporate tax, I think. But that's really the biggest that you can expect there. Trump is done in terms of taxation. It's not that much more that can be achieved there, especially also with the split Congress, of course. Biden's plans were actually calling for somewhat higher taxation, which is also quite necessary. If you look at American, the fiscal deficit that the U.S. is already running in 2019, that's already quite high. And then you end up with a historic stimulus package that you need because of Corona. Your debt to GDP ratio is getting to levels that would make people here in The Hague very nervous. So some increases of taxes, which you see proposed under Biden, a reversal to some degree of the corporate tax cuts that Trump gave, higher taxes that are more proportional for the higher incomes. They seem to be making up for some of the increased deficit that he will make, but also don't think that those plans are too radical. It doesn't look like these are enormous tax changes that you could have expected if you would have had somewhat more of a left-wing Democrat candidate that would. And
now with the left wing of the Democratic Party not that influential, if the Senate becomes once again a Republican majority. Yeah?
But then, exactly. Of course, the question will be what will happen in 2 years.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
But for the first 2 years, that could also bring a bit more stability. And Mr. Biden is the politician in the US who could build bridges, even with the Republicans. If one person could do that, it's Mr. Biden.
If you look at his yesterday in his
yes, he's healing.
Statement.
Come on, folks, there's only one America. We don't have blue rivers or red deserts. It's one America. And, well, only words, but he proved it in the past. So we will see what happens.
Casper, short reaction from your side. How big of a problem is this US national debt and deficit going to be for the next US president, be it Biden or be it Trump?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started off here as a correspondent, also for a newspaper, which is of course very interested in whatever happens with debt and the way the government runs its finances, it seems to be been reduced to mainly a talking point. Looking for fiscal conservatives here in the US is become a very difficult task, because there seem to be none in politics anymore. The Republican Party under Trump has spent like there's no tomorrow. And if you see the plans that have been drawn up by Mr. Biden, his version of the Green New Deal, let's call it that way, is a $2 billion package in the course of 4 years, which is of course an enormous sum. At the same time, what I find very interesting is that and maybe the fact that the national debt is rising so much is actually something that is forcing that issue. There are new schools of economic theory developing, saying maybe we should not worry that much about our economic debt. We can't go into depth too much, but you have things like modern monetary theory saying we're sovereign over our own currency, we're sovereign over our own banks and our national banking system. So the idea of debt as a political or break on what you can do politically, at least let me limit it to that, seems to be not very important to either Republicans or Democrats at the moment. So it could be, of course, that if Biden becomes the president, he starts spending, that Republicans draw back, or at least some of them, to their fiscal conservatism. But I think that is more a political point than a deeply held belief that the US should sort of restrain its spending habits.
Americans have to care about that much less than other countries. I mean, that's the case. If you have the reserve currency and you have the printer to that next to you, then that makes it somewhat easier to run big deficits and to have a high debt to GDP level.
Low interest rates.
And low interest rates, of course, make that very easy. And that, of course, is also a key reason why in this environment you see people relax their views on debt quite significantly, even here in Europe, even here in the Netherlands, where we are much more conservative in that sense, of course. But in the longer run, that is an issue that you have to deal with at some point. The fact that it wouldn't be an issue at all, that goes a bit far. But for the short run, I think a lot of economists would agree on the fact that this is an economy with such deep issues thanks to Corona that you would need that stimulus at this point.
For the last round of this conversation, we will be joined by two Dutch entrepreneurs who are very active on the US market. Present with us here in Amsterdam is Dennis Tan, CEO of Dashmode. And we have Youssef present with us by video from LG Sonic. Dennis, I'll start with you. You're the founder of Dashmode, a Dutch startup in artificial intelligence. Yep. Can you just briefly describe us how important is the US market for your company, and how do you respond to the broader expectations that we've just heard in the coming years?
First of all, thanks for having me. Nice to be sitting with you guys. Very important. I mean, we cannot deny that America is still one of the most important markets, especially as a tech company. The speed of adaptation there, the acceptance to new technology is much greater than any other place. And of course, having one large market makes it tremendously important to be active there. However, of course, whatever the outcome will be has a major impact on kind of the plans that are possible. So especially economic stability, general stability by default is very important to have to come out of the recession, but also for companies, for us to be able to enter or expand further.
Because you have experienced problems entering and
Yeah, I mean, one of the major differences, of course, on one side is the immigration law, which there's quite different policies on this depending on who becomes.
Mr. Biden promised less restrictions?
Yeah, they said in specific, Biden said within 100 days we will fix it again, basically, putting it back, most only certain visa tracks, to make it more easy to come back into the country.
And would that have a direct influence on your operations?
Yeah, definitely. But there are some upsides to both sides. On the other side, when you think of let's say the taxation, capital gains, it's too early to tell what it will actually end up, but it might make it a lot difficult to gain, for example, more capital for foreign companies. So a lot of companies go to the US to actually gain access to capital, but that might change with this regulation as well. So I would say it's evening it out, but obviously I think Biden would be a lot better in that case, but not so much for the economic reasons, but I would mostly say for the stability reasons. So there's a lot of Republicans who also switched their position. For example, taking Mark Cuban, who really decided to go to the other side because they said without clear leadership, it will be hard to get out of recession, but also for businesses to flourish. And it also counts for new businesses moving to the US as well.
Let's come back to China, because we've talked shortly about it, and it's very relevant in your sector, as I assume. The Trump administration has been very clear that they don't want companies that also have business interests in the US or who are using US technology to share these state-of-the-art techs with Chinese companies. For whatever reason, ASML is an example of this.
A clear example.
Since your company is very much involved in such technology, how do you see the future, and what would you do if you would end up in the same situation as ASML? Can you share with us what would be the questions that you would pose to yourself?
Yeah, also this would depend on who becomes president, of course, with the Senate being won by the others, by the Republicans, it will be lessen of an impact. But I would say we will get less picks of fights, as we mentioned, which also has implication on this part. So I think we'll be a softer touch looking upon it. So I think Biden is looking for more collaborative establishment, but you also see it with that he will probably reinstate some of the programs that Obama initially initiated for startup and scale up, also amongst AI as well. When it comes to these larger kind of things, I think it will be more interesting to see if Trump becomes what we will do as Europe around this topic, because they will really defend themselves, right? They will not look for so many collaborations. I wouldn't say it's a bad thing or a good thing. It depends on how we handle it. So one of the main things, there's a competing on the side of AI. We're behind on most topics. So if you take, for example, research, talent, adaptation, data, you see that China is rapidly becoming more proficient in some of these areas, especially data and adaptation. But Europe is behind on this topic. So I think we need to come up with an idea on what we would like to establish within that field.
And Bert, maybe just coming back to what Dennis has just said, what would you recommend for Europe, the future stance towards China and the US in this very complicated field that we've just sketched?
I mean, yes. I mean, from an economics perspective, that's very difficult. What you hear now is that Europe is sort of waking up in a world where it doesn't feel like we're just one happy globe anymore, and you see that we're focusing.
Were we ever?
I know, right? But
we thought so.
For
in the 90s.
A long time we did, exactly. Yeah. So you see that there's sort of more of that digital, but also industrial policy focusing more on Europe itself. It's difficult to establish that, as everything is more difficult in Europe to sort of come to consensus on. But the fact that it's in focus is I think it shows that there's more of sort of a feeling that we need to take care of ourselves. But it's especially sort of in the tech field, it's difficult to get sort of the same market access. Also from a cultural and language perspective, that's just difficult to do.
Yeah, I think it will mostly be interesting what we will do if talents cannot go to other parts of the world. How can we make sure we make the most out of it? Because I think it will be an upside. So if a lot of AI talent will not be able to go to the US as easy, they will stick around here. But there needs to be a platform where their talents can be displayed and can be used for us to get a better position in this battle.
So let them come to the Netherlands.
Exactly. I think that would be a good outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just to get an idea of how this practically works out for you, I mean, as I understand, you have both American investors and Chinese investors on your company.
Yeah, on purpose, by the way. Yeah.
On purpose, yes. But do you see these global tensions already in the practice of your company coming back? Do they trust each other?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very nice investor, so I don't have anything bad to say. But it's a topic of a matter on both sides, basically, because there's strength being pulled on both sides. So they do take it into account what happens in the end on both ends. So if Trump gets chosen, it will maybe further escalate. So there will be a more of a dividing line there. So that will have implications on also what decisions will be made in terms of future investments, especially in companies that have, for example, Asian investors or Chinese investors, and the other way around as well. I think Chinese companies are being much more protective. They set a very clear intellectual property strategy, which will have implication as well for companies who have American investors. So that one happy global world is becoming less and less, although we need it more than ever in these times, actually. So,
We'll switch shortly to Youssef, leading a Dutch-American company in water quality, providing sustainable technologies to treat algal blooms. Google it if you want to at home, not now. Your company is based in Scranton, Pennsylvania, hometown of Joe Biden. How did that happen?
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all. Yes, Scranton, everybody, when they hear it, they say, is it in the United States? That's the first reaction. And the second, why not in New York? And so when we started looking for a place, we thought it will be New York, Chicago, or Philadelphia. Finally, we hired a U.S. director, which was living near to Scranton, and it's a beautiful city. I went there. There is a good Italian pizza restaurant, so finally, nice. It was very good. And it's much cheaper than Philadelphia and New York to sit in.
But do you see any positive effects of let's say, a possible Biden government for your company? I mean, you are very active in this whole climate change field. He has announced large investments out there. What could be the consequence for you?
Yes, absolutely. It's very it will be very good if Mr. Biden will be the president, because he calls the climate change the #1 issue facing humanity. So, which means he is going to invest $2 trillion in the economy. And of course, as a chairman also of the Green Scale-up organization in the Netherlands, we are very happy when the Green Deal was announced, but also like this kind of investment. It's very good for my company, but also for the other companies in Europe. On top of that, Mr. Biden has also made a clear commitment to protect the drinking water from toxins, which is also the algae toxins.
Yeah. But as I understood, you could also have an interesting effect when a Trump government would remain in place in terms of your role in the fracking industry, cleaning the water out there.
Yes, no, absolutely. But before we will go to the specific need of our company, I think it's very good, like what the Trump administration has done by raising the America First idea. Because America First also, we should do it, by the way, also in Europe, and not to be naive anymore. America First made it for our company much easier to do business in the United States, because we were already located in the United States. We do have United States citizens working for us. We pay the taxes over there. So I thought I was a big supporter of America First. Of course, it has a limit. But we should not be naive on thinking like the whole world is open. And also, the way they are now dealing with the energy transition. Of course, I don't agree with them with the whole oil industry over there. I would like to have more sustainable energy. But for my specific company, it was very important because we are also in the cooling lagoons of these companies. We are in the nuclear plants. Lagoons. So my company is growing from all kinds of energy, but specifically also the nuclear plants.
But then the fracking part, it's also an interesting field, of course, to follow up with. What would be your role when Trump would be re-elected? Or your role, sorry, what would be your potential that you could have with your company in specifically this industry?
I would like Mr. Biden to win, just to make it very clear. But if Trump will win, like having all this import tax from China also is helping us, of course. Those are the things which help a company which is producing the units in the United States very good. But still, Mr. Biden will be much better for us.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not going into the scenario Trump. That's interesting to register. Would you say, if it's so important to have a US subsidiary, would you recommend that to other entrepreneurs to go and be on the ground?
It's a very good question. Not always. So the idea of having a large market in the United States attracts a lot of entrepreneurs in Europe. But if you will not have a very strong, unique selling point and a very innovative product, the competition there is very strong. I always say doing the business in the United States is like doing business in a small village. People need to know you and to shake the hands, okay, during the Corona time, not so often, but they need to see you in person. And it's a very local-based economy. Of course, it will not be for an IT company. But if you are dealing on the environment, if you are dealing with hardware, people need to see you. They need to know who is going to do the maintenance. And they will go from United States, till the States, till even on city-based. And we are active in a lot of states in the United States at this moment. And we are opening now also another office in a different state because we would like to be local present. So it's my advice not to go too quickly to the United States to do business if the market is big enough, because the competition is very, very strong. And to succeed in the United States, you really need to have a very strong product.
Before I ask the same question for you, Dennis, just let me remind you as an audience in our live stream that you have the option to pose your questions in the chat function. So please do so, because in a minute I'll be going to your questions. Dennis, would you say... Sorry?
Just a small remark. It took us about 3 years of a preparation before we will be able to succeed in the United States. So it's a long term. We have just get a grant from Florida, a $1 million grant to clean the waters over there. But it took about 3 years. So the time to do business in the United States is always underestimated.
That's well noted. Dennis, how was that for you? I mean, did you have the same experience? And would you also recommend to go and
for a big portion, I do agree. I do think there's a difference between hardware and software, obviously, and also with the time investment, the commitment you have to make it successful. But I think one element that should be highlighted is that there's a certain competitiveness that really scales up your business by default, right? So I think in Europe, we don't think that big. So even if there's more competition, you level up kind of your entire business by default. So I think it's something you don't want to, if you want to be a global player, if you want to be a large player, you do want to think strategically of entering the market, because I think it's good by default. and it seems very inobvious, but you see the largest thing by the mindset. So it also helps your current business here in Europe out as well. So I would definitely say, yes, think well in preparation about it, but definitely take action to move there as well. Yeah.
Let's see if we can have any questions from the chat. Are they visible for us here? If not, we will see if we can fix that in a minute. And I'll just go to Bert for a reaction on the two stories that we've just heard, brief stories from two entrepreneurs. What would be your advice for people who are thinking about how to cooperate with the US in the coming years?
I think that in general, it's, first of all, I mean, what the gents have said so far is very true, of course. I mean, America is very important as a place to go to, and it's likely that will remain the case in the coming years. I mean, that's something that doesn't change, right? It's a very important trade partner of us in the Netherlands, and it will remain a place with a ton of potential. So in that sense, don't let the Build Back Better, America First rhetoric fool you. I mean, it continues to be a very important place for doing business. What I actually thought was perhaps the most interesting thing is that Dennis just said, we don't think big in Europe. And I think that's very interesting, right? And maybe as a question to Dennis, why do you think that is? I feel like we still have quite a few barriers if we're talking about sort of the big blocks in the world, where it's harder for us to scale up in Europe, and that's something that that is difficult to deal with. But you make it sound like it's also the mindset.
Yeah, I've been on this topic, I think, for a long while. So I don't have the definite answer either. But I think there are a couple of things, right? So I think on one sense, we are by far the oldest, right? So living standard is very high here, so there's less of a need. You know, we compared to China, they want to regain to a certain high economic stance and position. America wants to be the world leader again. They are maybe already, but they want to retain that position. In Europe, we're more leaning back to that fact, basically. And I think on the other end as well is that we feel protected, right? So that means there's a lot of security. It's not needed to start a business. It was not even in the mindset 10, 15 years ago. So there's no push. So we're behind on that part, right? There's no option in China or in America in a lot of cases not to start a business, right? So and it is between either taking 3 jobs or starting your own business. Well, here you have the safety net, which is nice, of course, but it doesn't encourage you to start something. And once you tried it, there's a certain non-acceptance for failure. So once you tried it once, it's more like, why would you try again? You tried your hand at it, go to safety again. And it's good for a lot of sense, but if we want to innovate, we need to take more chances. So we need to get back more of our risk mentality to that point.
Willem, we hear Dennis say, we feel protected. I was curious to hear from you, is that, are we rightly so? Also in a broader sense, if the United States are so internally divided as they appear to be, what can we expect? Can the US resume this kind of global leadership that they have?
I'm definitely convinced that the US will come back. Yes, they have their problems like we in Europe and elsewhere in the world have. It's the land of opportunities. And the business of America is business. That was a remark by a former president in the 20s, President Coolidge. Land of opportunities. And, well, Biden, for instance. Okay, a moderate bridge builder. That is how we know him. He said a few months ago, because of all these problems, I have to act as a Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I am not FDR, of course, but I will be inspired by him, and we need big first steps. So, of course, with a divided Congress, you cannot fix everything, and you have to make compromises, and he is a great compromiser, but I expect a lot of investments in U.S. economy, and U.S. business can profit. And in the first week of the Biden presidency, you still have to say if he will be president. Late in the afternoon, there will be a press conference on Georgia, so that will be very important. If Biden retakes from Trump Georgia in the count, then it could be over rather quickly. But anyway, the first week of his presidency, maybe the first day, he will come back to the Paris Climate Treaty. And that is, of course, a huge signal. Here we are again, a modern
we want
society.
To collaborate again.
Are you happy with this?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy with kind of this, because we need that collaborative part to stand up again. In the end, we still have the strongest bond with America, so it's for us very beneficial to.
And you guys are talking about the details, of course. You're an economic expert, you're a businessman, but it's also very, very important, the broader message as a politician, to heal the wounds and to build the bridges. And that could be, I think the sentiment in the economy is also very important for the stock market, etc. So we will see what happens, but the world is longing for someone who, from Washington, gives the message we're back again in the world.
Just briefly, looking at the chat, we have a question. Regardless of who will become president, should the US not always be considered as one of the most interesting markets? Robert, thank you. Well, Yusuf, I'll start with you.
Can you please repeat the question?
Sorry, someone's asking, should the US not always be considered as one of the most interesting markets, regardless of who is the president? No.
I don't.
You don't agree? Why not?
It really depends. It really depends of your value proposition. But if you will take a look at China, India, and also South America, it's all growing market, and sometimes the opportunities will be there and not anymore in the United States. However, our turnover is for 40% from United States.
Well noted. Bert, what do you think?
It's hard to argue with what Yusuf just said. I mean, if you look at growth markets and if your business is focused on that, or, it's sector-wise, makes a big difference. But I think that I would have to agree with that. In general, the U.S. remains a very important place for the Netherlands to invest. And therefore, I think sort of, on average, I would still agree.
You would still agree. I would like to go to Casper Thomas for a last time. Casper, are you with us? Yes, you are.
Right here.
I assume you have been following the conversation, but also that you have been following the news closely. whilst we were talking, can you give us the latest? Is there any news that's to be shared with us? Short before 3 o'clock at Thursday, November 5.
Yeah, Georgia is probably going to announce the final tally of votes somewhere in the course of the day. So that is the first thing to look out for. And there's one interesting scenario which is now opening up, and that these elections are now by some people being termed the Las Vegas elections, because Las Vegas is in Nevada, and that might be the state where it might all fall down to. And if you, Mr. Post in the beginning, pictured this state, basically Las Vegas is the only place where a lot of voters live. So it's a gamble at the moment for many, and it seems to be also the place where these elections might be decided in the end.
Yeah. So who gets the jackpot? That's the
let's go to the strip.
It's a gamble. That was a great wordplay.
It's a gamble. Bert, there's a question for you. Oh, sorry, Casper. I give you the option to finish, and then we'll go to Bert.
Yeah, I just briefly wanted to say that it is typical. One of the things I think you can take out of these elections, and it is something to discuss also in the future, you see a definitive shift from the focal point of what is the most important in the US, from the industrial north to the Sun Belt in the south. That's where the elections are being decided. That is where the economy is partially shifting to, not disregarding Scranton, Pennsylvania, of course, by all means. But the weight of the South in America is very apparent in these elections.
Thank you, Casper. We had a last question for you, Bert. Being if renewable energy is a field where ING is interested to invest, if Biden will pop out in this gambling game that we see now.
Right. I think ING is in general always interested in renewable energy, but I'm also not the one deciding that.
Okay. Well, but
we have better people doing that than me to make that decision.
Sorry. Someone in the chat. This is the answer that you have to deal with. I think that brings our live stream to an end. Not before I've asked, the 3-4 of you here with us, 5. I think we can say that we have a tendency leaning to Biden, right? Or is there anyone still thinking that the jackpot will go to Mr. Trump?
No. You never know, but I think it's now more Biden than Trump, yes.
Casper?
I dare not predict. I mean, we still have a lot of court cases also, which are going to be conducted over the coming weeks. So there's an electoral outcome and there's a judicial outcome. And I hope the electoral outcome prevails, as should in a democracy, of course. But let's not disregard the fact that we might be up for looming court fights for weeks on end.
Thank you, Casper. Youssef?
Scranton.
We were lip dubbing, but I guess you said Biden.
Yeah, I heard. If you say Biden,
yes. Thank you very much.
Scranton, come on.
It will be Biden. I'd like to thank our panel members for sharing their insight and hope this will help you too in your business planning. Regardless of the outcome and consequences of these elections, there is something that will not change. The US marketplace offers opportunities, and NLinBusiness and WTC Netherlands Association have several experts that can assist you in expanding your business in the US. Please do take a look at the goodie bag, for which you will also find a link in the thank you mail. On behalf of our host, the Amsterdam WTC Business Club, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And of course, a big thank you to all our 6 panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.